Well, we received a call and from some frantic property owners, some farm owners, who had found an illegally set snare, neck snare, placed on their fence line. And they were very upset about it. They told me that the bobcat was still alive and that they were concerned that it would soon perish. And so I essentially scrambled to get my equipment together and headed out to their location as quickly as possible. The vast majority of these calls with animals that have been caught in traps, leg hold traps, snares, aren't good. Most of the animals are in such bad shape they have to be euthanized. And then the other ones, oftentimes the animals are dead by the time we get there. In this situation, when we came around the corner and saw this guy, it was obvious he was still in really good shape. He was just angry about his predicament. And so one of the tools we use in restraining cats especially is a packing blanket, a moving blanket. It's okay. After several attempts of taking this packing blanket with help of the property owners, we were able to finally get it over his head, his upper torso, and able to pin him down to where I had access to his back legs and his torso, which is where the snare was wrapped around. The snare was set, it was what's called a fence set, where it's set at the base of a fence to where when the animal crawls through the snare, it's supposed to grab them around the neck, and then eventually they slowly strangle themselves to death by pulling on the snare. This little guy was fortunate enough to where it caught him around the torso, where he has a lot of his spinal cord obviously, but also there's a lot of muscle there. And he had been in the snare, I figured, maybe 12 hours. It was tight. It was right down to his skin. And it was extremely difficult getting the wire cutters underneath the cable and finding where that point was. And then it was very, very high tensile cable, then clamping down and after repeated attempts, cutting it, and then making sure that the other parts of the cable that were still wrapped around him were untangled from his body, and that when we would let him free, that he would be unencumbered, that he'd be able to bolt. At least this was the hope at the time. But you never know how these situations are going to play out. And from looking at him, the color of his eyes, the color of his gums, he looked in really, really good shape. So I was very optimistic. And it all worked out. We finally were able to free him of the snare and basically pull the blanket off of him. And watch him take off. And it was a extraordinarily rare moment. I've been doing this type of thing most of my adult life, and I have to tell you, this was probably one of the most extraordinary moments for me, in that he was basically unharmed, and he was very vocal, and watching him run off was absolutely breathtaking.